Thank you for staying with us on the conversation. Now, at the UN, Mali's Prime Minister Abdoulaye Maïga unleashed a stark warning. The AES Confederation, consisting Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, will not be passive after what he says was Algeria's downing of a Malian drone. Now, having lodged a case at the International Court of Justice, that's the ICJ, the bloc vows to harden its defenses and answer every provocation, a promise that turned a diplomatic row into a drumbeat of potential retaliation. Now, the incident cracks open a wider, darker story across the Sahel. After successive coups, these states walked away from ECOWAS, expelled French forces, leaned on new partners, and quit the ICC, rewriting the region's rules of engagement. So what looked like simmering frustration now risks exploding into full diplomatic confrontation, and the map of African security is being redrawn under the shadow of that threat. Joining us to speak more on this, we have Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow, Africa Programme in Chatham House.
Good evening.
Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us at this time.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, so you've heard Mali's Prime Minister at the UN say that the AES, I quote, will not stand by after the drone incident. So from a geopolitical perspective, or from your perspective, how significant is this public escalation?
Well, I don't really think that there's something very concrete that the AES states can do against Algeria. They can complain publicly at the UN, but that's essentially a diplomatic move. But what it really tells us is that several years now 5 years after the first coup in Mali, 4 years after the second one where the military really reinforced their hold on power, still the relationship with Algeria, Mali's main northern neighbor, remains incredibly bitter and fractious and difficult. And right at the heart of this is a sort of fundamental difference between, really on two points. One is that Algeria is a country that has always played a particularly big role in the African Union, is very conscious of the African Union rules, and is very reluctant to see, shall we say, established constitutional structures shaken up. And so Algeria was particularly unsettled by the military coups in Mali and then later in Burkina Faso and Niger. But the other factor is one related really to the Azawad movement. This is the movement of people in the northern element of the Tuareg populations in the center of the Sahara, some of whom support a movement wanting the creation of either an independent state, Azawad, or some form of regional autonomy. And basically, the Malian government, the current Malian government, is completely opposed to that idea, whereas Algeria is perceived as offering a safe haven, if you like, a support for the Tuareg separatist movements. Yeah. And that's really been at the heart of it. So the drone incident, it's very hard to tell exactly whether or not the drone crossed the border. Each side accuses the other, and there are no independent observers to be able to verify the position, of course, because the UN peacekeeping force was told by the current Malian government it was asked to leave Mali. So we don't have any independent way of verifying what actually happened. But the drone incident's really about this bigger issue.
Okay, but Mali has actually taken the case to the ICJ. But the ICJ has said that it cannot proceed without Algeria's consent. So are there other legal avenues, for Bamako? And does it constrain or inflame political options on the ground?
I don't really think there are other legal options for Bamako, because it is the ICJ, which is the court that would be looking at those type of sort of territorial infringement issues. although Mali has now, along with Niger and Burkina, officially declared its withdrawal from the International Criminal Court, even if it had stayed in, or even if it was still covered for an interim period by the International Criminal Court rules, the ICC wouldn't really be the body that would deal with that issue. So, in a sense, if the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, has ruled that the case can't proceed, that really brings an end to what Mali can do about it. And of course, in legal terms. And the other complication for the Malians is that, of course, the government came to power through a military coup, therefore it's not fully recognized as legitimate by the African Union. So the avenue for using diplomacy, if you like, within the African Union, asking, for example, the African Union Body for Peace and Security to look at the issue, that is probably also rather limited. So it's more an important political gesture. It's aimed to a certain extent at the public back home in Mali and in the allied other Sahel states, and perhaps more generally in West Africa, because, there's quite a lot of Algeria doesn't necessarily have the best image in the eyes of many West Africans, for example, because of its very harsh treatment of West African migrants. So it's probably in political terms quite a good move for the Malian government to pursue this critique and to do it at the UN in a very public way. But in practical legal terms, there isn't much more they can do about it.
So if, diplomatic channels collapse, right, what are the realistic escalation ladders available for them? Expulsions, economic measures, or proxy operations? What are we seeing?
Well, in economic terms, Algeria is in a stronger position than Mali, because in northern Mali, quite a lot of the food supplies, for example, are items that are brought in often informally from Algeria. Algeria has a statist economy, a sort of more or less socialist model, which means that certain products like fuel, certain food items are subsidized. And of course, that creates an attraction for people to traffic these goods across the border into the northern Malian market. So Mali is an importer of Algerian goods. It's not really an exporter. And in terms of Mali's capacity to create security problems, if the Malians wanted to, that would be very difficult. I don't think they do. I don't think they want to be seen as a country that engages in aggressive military action against their neighbors anyway. But it wouldn't really be practical for them to exert military pressure on Algeria. It has a vastly stronger military. And an interesting question, a sort of subtext, is that Algeria has quite good relations with Russia, or very good relations, long-standing close ties with Russia. And of course, Mali has, after getting the French to leave and then asking the United Nations to leave, Mali's principal security partner is Moscow. Firstly, in the form of the mercenary company Wagner, and now in the form of the Africa Corps, which is a sort of military structure more closely under the control of the Russian government's defense hierarchy. So behind the scenes, I suspect that there may be quiet encouragement from Russia to, on both sides, to keep the issue at the level just of rhetoric and complaint rather than anything more.
Okay, now we know that Algeria is also a major regional player with its own security concerns, right? But how does its domestic and regional interests shape its likely response should we or would we be witnessing a broader state-on-state realignment in the Maghreb Sahel, arc?
I don't think so. Although Algeria feels uncomfortable, didn't it with the military regimes in the Sahel? It didn't like the coups. It prefers to see constitutional government, and it preferred, therefore, to see the elected presidents of those countries in place than to see them displaced by military rulers. And although those military regimes, if you like, have perhaps reduced Algeria's regional political influence in the center of the Sahel, I don't think we're going to see a confrontation or anything like that. Algeria places great value on its role in the African Union. For many years, the Peace and Security Commissioner role at the African Union was held by Algerians. Not at the moment. It's currently a Nigerian, of course, but for many years, that was a job that the Algerians saw naturally as theirs. They have always sort of positioned themselves very much as an establishment defender of good order, if you like. And I think one of the worries for the Algerians is that Morocco has been reaching out to the three central Sahelian states. The Moroccans, although they're actually also have very good relations with countries in ECOWAS and good relations with Western Europe, they have also been reaching out to the military regimes in the Sahel, particularly presenting their agenda to offer a maritime gateway to the landlocked Sahelian countries, whose relations obviously with coastal West Africa are a bit difficult at the moment. So the Moroccans in Western Sahara, they're developing a big new port at Dakhla, and they're quite keen to promote this, what they talk about as a sort of Atlantic gateway, and to suggest to the Sahelians that this could be an alternative trade route that would leave Mali, Burkina, and Niger less dependent on the Sahel's traditional trade gateways on the West African coast.
Well, still speaking on this, and you talked about Morocco reaching out. We've also seen increased use of, non-state military actors and private contractors in the region. Does this dispute increase the risk that, third parties or mercenaries become involved? And will that change the conflict dynamics if they do get involved?
I'm not sure that it does increase the risk. I mean, there was a big security incident in mid-2024 where quite a lot of more than 80 Wagner soldiers, fighters, mercenaries, were reportedly killed by the Tuareg movements operating in the sort of Algeria-Mali border area. And I think one of the problems with these private military contractors is they tend not to operate according to the same human rights rules as regular army troops. And so actually increased use of military contractors could actually make it more difficult to resolve the security situation in the north of Mali. But there's also politics, which is probably a bigger factor, because essentially the Malian government, there had been a peace agreement between these northern Tuareg groups and the elected Malian government back in 2015, a peace agreement called the Algiers Accord, because the negotiations were hosted in Algiers. And the Malian military government, after the military took power, they eventually decided to withdraw from that agreement and instead launch a military offensive against the Tuareg groups. And so that's the sort of driver behind the situation in the north of Mali at the moment. Okay. And it's one of the reasons why the relations with Algeria are so bad. because the Malian government feels that Algeria is supporting the Tuareg armed groups. And the private military companies, Wagner as was, and now Africa Corps, though it's slightly less private than Wagner, they're a complicating factor because they're accused by the Tuareg groups and others of basically committing human rights abuses, not showing the same concern for basic human rights and the rules of war. And so they would just be a complicating factor. Fundamentally, somewhere at the core of this is a need for some sort of political understanding or resolution. Until there is a political deal of some kind, it's hard to see this being sorted out. Okay.
Well, I think with that, we'd actually have to wrap up this conversation. But thank you so much, Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow, Africa Programme, Chatham House, for joining us and speaking on this.